Trishaw Man. Gregory Limb was only 13 years old, but he was the best student in his class. All his teachers said he was doing very well. "Singapore needs young people like him," they said. "He'll go far." But Gregory wasn't very good at sport. He wasn't bad, but he wasn't good. It wasn't important, not really. He was intelligent, but he wasn't strong. Gregory's father, Thomas Limb, was strong, very strong, and he loved his son. No father could feel better about his son than Thomas did. He was always thinking about his only child. Thomas drove a trishaw, and he worked for many hours a day. He drove people around on a 3-wheeled trishaw bicycle. The bicycle pulled a seat for 2 people. It had a kind of big umbrella at the back. This went over the seat to keep the sun out of people's eyes. Thomas often had 2 or sometimes 3 people in his trishaw. They sat under the umbrella while he pulled them around in the hot sun. Sometimes taxi drivers got angry with him because the trishaw was slow. The taxi drivers also didn't like Thomas taking business away from them. But that didn't happen so often now. Years ago, people used trishaws a lot. But people these days usually wanted taxis because they were quicker. Trishaws were too slow for most people. Only tourists on holiday used them, and sometimes old people who liked to remember the old days. Thomas often had to work well into the night to make enough money to live on. Gregory's mother, Anita, liked to think of her son as she worked at a fish shop. Every time she cleaned a fish or put a kilo of prawns in a bag, she thought of her only child. She didn't mind all the hard work and the smell of the fish on her skin. It was all done for her son. The money from Anita's job at the fish shop helped to pay for Gregory's school things. Yes, it was a hard life for Thomas and Anita, and everything they did was for their son. Gregory was going to get a good job and look after them when they were old. Gregory went to school by bus. He hated it when other students arrived at school in taxis or cars. The rich students came in their father's new Mercedes or comfortable taxis. He was the best student, but it was the others who had money. That's how Gregory saw it. They were the ones with nice new clothes. They played computer games. They ate hamburgers at expensive fast food restaurants when they wanted to. And everybody knew his parents were poor. That's what Gregory hated most. They all knew his father drove a trishaw. Everybody saw his father pulling tourists around in the hot sun. Could there ever be a worse job than that? Why, driving an old taxi was better than driving a trishaw. Gregory wasn't the only one from a poor family. Many other students also had 2 working parents. But their fathers had better jobs than his father. They didn't work in the hot sun, and they wore nice clothes. They got paid every month. Gregory loved his father. He knew how hard he worked. If only his father had a different job. Gregory was an A student, but his father was a poor trishaw driver. It was all wrong. No, Gregory never forgot what his father did, but he often wanted to. "Ay-ya!" said Thomas to himself as he pulled the trishaw up a hill. There were 2 heavy tourists in the back, and the roads were full today. It was National Day, a holiday in Singapore. It was very busy, and everybody was having a party. People were out in the streets. The red and white colours of Singapore were everywhere. It was a good time for business for Thomas. Cars were slow on the busy roads. This was one of the few times that Thomas's Trishaw could be quicker than a car. It was a good time to make money, but it was hard work. After all, he wasn't getting any younger. His 2 tourists wanted to see the famous Raffles Hotel. It was a favourite place for tourists. On that day, there was another visitor to the hotel, a beautiful and very famous film star called Diane Troy. She was making a film in Singapore. Diane was having a day off from filming and wanted to rest. But she had lots of fans who wanted to see her. Everybody knew Diane Troy was staying at Raffles. The street outside the hotel was very busy. People were there for National Day and also to see their favourite film star. There were hundreds of people all around the front of the hotel. They all wanted to see Diane Troy. The fans were happy, but after a time they felt uncomfortable. The sun was hot, and it wasn't easy for people to move. There were just too many people there. All the taxis coming to the hotel moved slowly because of the crowd. It was still early afternoon. The day was at its hottest. Thomas could get to the hotel quite quickly. He knew his way around Singapore better than almost anybody. He knew all the shortest ways that cars were too big to use. And it was easier for a Trishaw to move through lots of people. Cars were much slower. Thomas always called out in a loud voice to let people know he was coming. The Trishaw stopped outside Raffles Hotel, and the 2 tourists got out. They wanted to see Diane Troy too. There were cameras everywhere, and so many people. The 2 tourists took out their cameras, and Thomas said goodbye. He was about to go when Diane Troy came to the window. Everybody pushed to the front to get a better look. All the people were very close together. Diane Troy smiled and waved to the fans, and they shouted back. Then Thomas saw something at the front of the crowd. A woman was calling loudly for help. But why? Then he saw why. The woman was trying to stop a young girl from falling. It wasn't easy with all those people around them. The girl was about 12 years old. Both the woman and the girl looked like tourists. "My daughter!" the woman shouted. "A hornet stung her. Please help me. She needs a doctor quickly." There were shouts from the people around her. They all knew that hornets in Singapore are very dangerous. Hornets can kill children or old people. Everybody is afraid when they see the big black and yellow insects. But the nearest hospital was far away. The woman couldn't walk through the streets carrying the sick child. Certainly not when the streets were as busy as this. A taxi was too slow in these crowds. But Thomas knew what to do. Gregory Lim felt very pleased. He was looking at a page from the Straits Times, Singapore's biggest newspaper. Lots of students were looking at it. The page was up on the school wall. Tourist stung by hornet. Film star says thank you to Trishaw driver. Thomas Lim, a Singapore Trishaw driver, took a very sick Australian girl to hospital yesterday. A hornet stung the girl, 12-year-old Tracy Kinsella from Melbourne, on the arm outside Raffles Hotel. I was so afraid for Tracy, her mother, Mrs. Lauren Kinsella, said. Insect stings make her very ill. She had to see a doctor at once. Police officer Melvin Yip, who was at the hotel, told this newspaper what happened. The crowds of people made things worse for Miss Kinsella. The girl needed help quickly. A taxi couldn't get through the crowded streets in time. It certainly was quick thinking from Mr. Lim. With his Trishaw, he was much faster than any car. Yes, Miss Kinsella is well now because of Mr. Lim. I'm sure of that. Miss Diane Troy, the famous film star, saw what happened. I saw it all from my hotel window, Miss Troy told this newspaper. I was saying hello to my lovely Singapore fans at the time. Then I saw that poor girl. She looked very sick, but Mr. Lim was so good. He knew just what to do and got that poor girl to a doctor in time. Gregory smiled as the students read the newspaper story on the wall. That was his father they were reading about. His father, the Trishaw driver.